I am reading the piece that is in the book, so now that you will hear it, you don't have to read it ever again, but you can. In the early months of 2018, my friend Jay and I developed a ritual. One Saturday a month, he'd show up on my stoop at 2 a.m., both of us bleary off our disco naps. We'd get in a car and go to a low-slung building in Bushwick whose facade looked like the outside of a saloon in a Western movie. Inside was a disused banquet hall fashioned into a simulacrum of Berlin. Black clothes, hard techno, lots of drugs. Neither of us had been to Berlin, but we understood it as a place where the rules were not quite so constricting and the music was really good. The ritual continued like so. Buy a mate, take MDMA, and talk about anarchism. One night, we stood on a balcony overlooking the dance floor, watching the separate movements of 300 strangers cohere around Mary Yuzovskaya's hypnotic pounding. It was autonomy in motion, a collective experience created by individual choice and consideration of the whole. Jay turned to me, his pupils crowding out the whites of his eyes, and yelled, "This is it! This is the revolution!" It was the kind of proclamation that only happens when you're rolling, something that feels so pure and urgent that you have to shout it even though it's ridiculous. At that moment, the lights flashed to red, then off to black, the colors of the anarchist flag, and we didn't stop laughing for 5 minutes. I had been going to demos and actions since I was 12. Raving had only come to me in the previous year, and I was convinced that it was revolutionary. How else to explain my friendship with Jay? It started the year before its sustained release, when he wandered up to me and my friend S at the fire pit at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, looking for someone to talk to about autonomous organizing. How else to explain that we kept making more friends at demos who turned out to be ravers and friends at raves who turned out to be leftists? I read about field raves in Britain in the early 1990s that in retrospect have been interpreted as revolts against Thatcherite austerity. I read about how Berghain started as an anarchist squat amid the rubble of the Berlin Wall. I went to raves that fundraised against ICE. I started a zine with S about the rave as liberation. At the demos we all went to, we heard the classic chant, "We are unstoppable, another world is possible." The one without prisons, borders, violent hierarchies. Possible, sure, but impossibly far away. And then we went to the rave together, and when it was a good night, we stepped into the other world. It usually appeared around 3 a.m., when the amateurs left, and ended whenever sunlight first pierced our field of vision. I call it the time between yesterday and tomorrow. McKenzie Wark calls it the time where there is more time. Henri Lefebvre, I can't pronounce this guy's last name, Lefebvre? Somebody here has read this guy and can correct me, who I don't think ever went to a rave, but would probably have liked them, calls it appropriated time. The time we take back from the rhythms of capitalism and use for our own purposes. It is a time that forgets time, during which time no longer counts and is no longer counted. It arrives or emerges when an activity is in harmony with itself and with the world. It has several traits of self-creation or a gift, rather than an obligation or an imposition come from without. I found that moving with my friends in appropriated time strengthened our bonds in the streets. As we pulled up our bandanas and stared down the cops, we knew the vision we were fighting for because we had been there over the weekend. Solidarity and techno felt the same in our bodies, explosive, totalizing, exhilarating. In my first few years of raving, I would look around at the crowd and assume it was made up of radicals I just hadn't met yet, strangers who also heard liberation in the speakers. The anarchist and the raver both count police and real estate as enemies, and the need to destroy both seemed so intuitive to me that I could not imagine anyone at the party felt differently. I simply hadn't met enough of the people I was dancing with. One night, I made a friend on the dance floor and found out the next day that she worked at Palantir, and so did another guy I saw around all the time. Someone I recognized from the latest hours at the best parties turned out to work at a government office whose mandate was to bring raving under the purview of the state. I ran into one of New York's headline DJs during the 2020 uprising, one who had soundtracked many of my hours of appropriated time, and she told me that she had never read the news until that month. She was 37. The people around me on the dance floor were there to escape, like me, but they weren't doing much to change the conditions we were escaping from. There was nothing political about any of it. The last time I went to the party where Jay and I had first seen revolution on the dance floor, there were uniformed NYPD officers at the door. The promoters didn't want to get shut down, so they asked the cops for permission to throw a rave and agreed to their every demand. In the winter of 2021, a friend from Montreal, who showed up unannounced sometimes in New York at raves, other times at an autonomous organizing space in Ridgewood, posted a video of a renegade on some train tracks. It looked like the kind of thing we couldn't get away with in New York. I asked him where it was. Atlanta, he told me. Are you hooked into Stop Cop City? A year and a half earlier, on June 12, 2020, an Atlanta cop had shot and killed an unarmed black man named Rayshard Brooks in the parking lot of a Wendy's. George Floyd had been murdered less than 3 weeks before, and the next day, Atlantans burned the Wendy's to the ground. In the spring of 2021, the mayor of Atlanta announced her solution to police brutality, a $90 million training facility to be built on land in the unincorporated outskirts of the city that was currently a forest and had previously been a prison farm. Its marquee innovation was a mock town where the cops could practice putting down mass urban revolt. Another 2020 uprising would not be tolerated. Organizers in Atlanta dubbed the plan Cop City. By the time I saw my friend's video, a few dozen of these organizers had started a full-time encampment in the forest to physically stop Cop City from being built. The ravers in the movement, and there were many, insisted on throwing parties almost every month because their vision of a world without Cop City included having fun. Later, one of them told me that the forest was the only place left in Atlanta for raving because the same police that would train at Cop City had collaborated with the real estate industry to shut down warehouse parties in preparation for rezoning abandoned industrial parks into condos and upscale retail. As ravers, they understood the stakes of the movement, a future where raves and treves give us life, or one where police take both and kill us. The encampment survived the winter and then the spring. Environmentalists, school teachers, prison abolitionists, and artists joined the crust punks. From afar, it seemed to me that the forest defense was working because it operated like a good rave. A large group of people, many of them strangers, had converged to see what would happen when they tried to do something together, even if they had different reasons for being there and no particular outcome was guaranteed. In June, a call echoed across Signal group chats. Come to Atlanta for a week of action in July and see what it's like to live in the other world that's possible. 6 of us bought flights. There was J, of course, and D, who we'd met in the Nagur at Nowadays. Our 3-person group chat was named after Mark Fisher. I'd met N because we simultaneously had the same idea during the 2020 uprising to collect earplugs from shuttered nightclubs and distribute them to street medics to guard against NYPD sound cannons. Her oldest friend, G, had partied in Berlin and joined an occupation against a coal mine in rural Germany. Our friend L, who N had met at a New Wave night in Chicago, was the only one who had been to Atlanta. These were the people I trusted with a trip across state lines to do the most militant thing I'd ever done, and I had met all of them through raving. The climate of summer in Atlanta reminded me of the unventilated back room of a chicken and pizza shop in Brooklyn that hosted raves before COVID. In both, oxygen was replaced by moisture. Otherwise, the forest was spectacular, light dappling through the pine trees, a creek running past our tents, salamanders in the underbrush, birds overhead. A sign nailed to a tree trunk marked the entrance to the encampment. You are now leaving the USA. We entered unending appropriated time, which we filled with walks, workshops, cooking, reading, and conversations with strangers about the years-long political journeys that had brought us to the forest. There was a rave on Saturday night to cap off the week of action. Glow sticks sketched a path on the forest floor toward a clearing sheltered by an enormous blue tarp. Other than all the camo, no one really looked like a raver. The speakers were blown out and blasting a UK garage edit of I Ain't Got You by Alicia Keys. As twilight fell, even more people showed up, teenagers and wooks and punks, punctuating the DJ sets with cries of Stop Cop City. It was not like any other rave I'd been to. It was a rave in the original sense, a renegade DIY free party that didn't seek to create a specific experience, but conjure an entirely new space. I realized that I had in fact never been to a rave, only varyingly expensive parties. Those parties were just rooms full of strangers unless the conditions were perfect. The music, the crowd, the lights, whatever drugs I was on, they all had to coalesce into transcendence. I needed the music in particular to hypnotize me away from the world outside. But in the forest, I needed none of it. I looked around at my friends, totally sober, these relationships that intertwined waving with a belief in the total transformation of the world. Here we were together, in the place we sought in Brooklyn at 5 a.m. but rarely found. And so it didn't really matter that the music was inconsistent, that the lights were bright, that people were twirling fiber optic whips off to the side of the dance floor. In the forest, we had appropriated not just time, but the world itself. And in this place, the other world that's possible, there was still a rave, but one of celebration rather than escape. Raves are a threat to the order of things, and so this state must crush them. But their threat is tiny, a night of rebellion that lasts for maybe 10 hours. The repression is small, too, a brief detainment, a fine, an impounded sound system. In the months after we visited the encampment, Stop Cop City grew into the most potent and entrenched threat the U.S. government had seen in years. A small group of anarchists and racial justice activists had become the focal point of global leftist organizing. The narrative was ironclad. Why destroy a forest and replace it with cops? 4 months after the rave, once winter temperatures had shrunk the encampment, the police dragged 6 forest defenders out of their tree houses and charged them with domestic terrorism. 2 months after that, the police shot a forest defender named Tortuguita 52 times during a raid near the forest dance floor and charged 4 more people there with domestic terrorism. In March, the police raided a music festival near the forest during another week of action and charged 36 people there with domestic terrorism. There was supposed to be a rave that night, but it didn't happen. The next month, as I cried with Dee about all of it, they told me something they'd learned during a conversation in Atlanta. The founder of the Ridgewood organizing space, where our forest crew was spending increasing amounts of time, had been learning how to DJ before he was killed in a collision on the drive back from Standing Rock. He had apparently become convinced that transformational change would be possible only if it included parties. Jay had not been wrong on the balcony. It was not a coincidence that we had met at a For the Heads techno festival, or that the rave friends had led me to Atlanta, or that the forest encampment was founded partially by ravers, or that raves happened there all the time. We rave because it allows us to feel in our bodies a defiance of the lie that the world the cops impose on us is the only option. Raving is not a political act or a utopia, but it contains the seed of revolution if you give it some free water.